In the name of the Father, I mean, well, Jesus is talking about end times. There's a couple of things that I always want to say about this. The end times refer to events that are cosmic and events that are deeply personal. You are all going to die. The little babies that are here in the church, they are all going to die. Everyone is going to die. So, when we think about the end of our times, we should think about what was written here today. Because what happened? As you know, I was sick and I was in the hospital briefly. And it never escapes me to think that just with a little nudge one way or the other, I could pass. It's not a morbid thing. I don't want anybody to think that dying is a problem. Dying is not a problem. The problem is not being with God when you die. That's the problem. Not being with God when you die is the problem. Not dying itself. Everybody is born, everybody dies. But there are some times when the ability to reflect is heightened when you are sick, because everything is going out of kilter. Now, what happened when the Jews did not obey the Messiah? When the Jews did not allow Jesus to take his proper place? When the Jews put him to death by the accord of their heart as a group? The temple was torn apart. The Romans ruled over them. All governance that they had, all of the society that they had enjoyed, every bit of it was torn asunder. Isn't that analogous to a man who is sitting in a bed in a hospital and maybe his kidneys aren't working very well? And then when his kidneys start to fail, other systems begin to collapse because of the stress. And then you have this kind of systematic failure, one thing after another, and then death comes from something that's seemingly relatively minor. But it wasn't, because one simple thing took control. When we begin to believe that what manifests itself in our lives is the product of education and intelligence and not the will and the specific nature of the gifts of God and the grace that He allows each one of us to experience, when we begin to think that it is something of our own and not His, we start to have a failure of a system. The system begins to collapse in us. And when that happens, things can become catastrophic. Now, I'll tell you why these things occur. Each one of us fears in some way judgment, and yet we shouldn't. Suppose we put all of the people in the world in one long line. In one long line. Right in the middle of that line, you would have the average person in terms of height. If they were shortest to tallest, if they were graded in that manner. And you would say to this person, you are at the 50th percentile exactly. Well, but suppose he was a member of the pygmy tribe. He might have been a giant in his own tribe, because the pygmies are an especially small group of people, small in stature. Suppose this man, being of average height, was a member of the Watusis, or the Dinka of Sudan. He would be the shortest man in his tribe. So there is a relative judgment, and there is an absolute judgment. And we are afraid of both. And we normally put ourselves into a group or a tribe that favors us. Suppose we do the same thing with intelligence. Suppose we take the smartest people in the world, the 99th percentile. Everyone standing at the front of those lines, we call and put into another special group. Do you know that one of those people, one of those in the 99th percentile, is going to be the dumbest one in the group? By definition, because it will be a relative judgment. Because within that group, one person may have an IQ of over 200, while another one has an IQ of only 130. And there you are. So, what is it then when we hear words or descriptive words that we want to move away from? My wife rebuked me yesterday because she said I used the word fat. Because I used the word fat. And she says, don't forget, in your church there are some fat people. Well, yes. But fat compared to whom? You know, there was Konishki. You don't know his name, but he's famous. You can Google him and I'll tell you how to spell his name, because it doesn't exactly, it's not spelled exactly the way it's pronounced. Konishki. The man is 6'2", he's Hawaiian, he's a sumo wrestler, and he weighed 636 pounds. And he's quite athletic. If you take the two fattest people in our church, they do not weigh 636 pounds. So standing next to Konishki, everybody is skinny. That is a relative judgment. Where one is going to be fat depends upon where perhaps the American Medical Association or the Association of, I don't know, physical fitness, and they will say, well, if you're a man and you have more than 25% of your body weight is fat, then you're fat. You're fat. That would be an absolute decision. Now, you can argue with your decision, but what I'm getting at is, why would somebody want to run away from that kind of truth, if we call it the truth? I imagine myself to be of average height, because there are a lot of people that are small in China, there are a lot of people who are small in Southeast Asia, there are a lot of people who are small or short of stature in India. And so I imagine myself at, well, I used to be 5'8", I'm older now, so maybe I'm only 5'7", but I imagine myself to be of average height. Average height. But again, if I go to Holland, I'm short, because the Dutch are the tallest group of people in the world as a nation. So now I'm the shortest person there. Does that really change anything about me? No. Why then should feelings be involved when we make assessments about ourselves? If I can speak to you clearly about my weight, or if I can speak to you clearly about my height, why can't I speak to you clearly about yours? Or why can't I speak to you clearly about some personality habit of yours? It will have an absolute measurement, and again, that scale is subject to arbitration, and it will have a relative measurement. The relative measurement you cannot argue with, because relative to a particular group, you will absolutely be where you are, because it will be quantifiable. In an absolute thing, you can say, well, who's to tell? Who's to tell if the AMA is correct? Because I can certainly tell that there are people, for example, the strongest men in the world, the very strongest men in the world, have a fat content of their body which exceeds 20%. And these men are in the high to middle 300-pound class. and their height is usually around 6'5" or so. And they hail from the Eastern Bloc countries, from Germany, and from the Nordic countries. And if you look at the strongest men, if you Google it, you will find that what I'm saying to you is accurate. Why would somebody get their feelings hurt? My wife, as you know, is all about feelings. I'm not about feelings, because feelings are something that are so changeable, like the mercury that's in a tube. If you heat it a little bit, it shoots up. If you put an ice cube underneath it, it slumps back down. It moves up and down depending upon the weather. Right? It moves at a predictable rate. Emotions don't even do that. One day you can say something that you think is not going to be harmful at all or hurtful at all, and the next day you say the same thing and people are outraged. Why am I talking about this? Because until we can be honest with ourselves and where we are as human beings, just in the ordinary sense of the word, we can't say anything about our own religiosity. Who is spiritual in this room? Who is spiritual? Is anyone in this room spiritual at all? Well, in a relative sense, we can say absolutely. There will be one person in this room that is the most spiritual of everyone. Now, I don't know who that is, and I'm not claiming that for myself. But absolutely, in relative terms, in this room, there is someone, and it may be a child, by the way, that is the most spiritual. But if we think about the people that we call saints, is there anyone in this room like unto the ones that are in the Synaxar? Oh. But wait a minute. We can argue with that because, as I said before, you can argue with the criteria that was used to form the gradient means of observation and, finally, evaluation. Is that the most incredible scale? Or is it a scale that is applicable in any real way to what we are facing in our society? What is it? Remember St. Macarius, the Great? He said to the Lord one time in prayer, Lord, unto what am I like, and unto what level have I risen? The Lord said, okay, I want you to go to this house, and when you open up the door, I want you to inquire about the people therein. So he went to this house, and he found an ordinary house. There were two brothers living there, and they had married two sisters. The sisters had wanted to be nuns, but it was not to be, so they yielded in their humility. And these two sisters, not of flesh, but of spirit, these two sisters, when a baby would cry, whether it was their baby or another baby, they would immediately pick up the baby and attend to that baby's needs. They did not differentiate between their children and the other's children. Remember, it was two brothers who had married two women. I called them sisters earlier because they were sisters in the deepest possible way. Now, you can imagine St. Macarius, a man who is being compared to a woman. That's a rather low blow. But what the Lord is trying to say is the gradient means of evaluation was one of perfect symbiosis, living together spontaneously in harmony and love and humility. And that was the perfection of grace in the life of these two women that St. Macarius had attained to after so many years of struggle. And remember, this is St. Macarius the Great. He was the one who pretended to eat during the 40 days of Lent. He didn't eat. He stood up the entire 40 days of Lent. He did not sleep. In doing so, he aroused the community of St. Pachomius to such a peak, P-I-C-Q-U-E, such a peak, such a point of fervor, that they said, have you brought this man who has no body in here just to shame us? St. Pachomius didn't quite know what to say. He prayed about it because he didn't know the man himself. But it was St. Macarius the Great who he had for a long time sought to see. Now I tell you these things because I don't know how we are going to improve as a people until we are no longer afraid of being called names. You remember when Ronald Reagan was having problems with Muammar Gaddafi? Well, Muammar Gaddafi had found out from his ministers that if he wanted to insult an American, insult him on the basis of decrepitude. So Muammar Gaddafi called Reagan an old man. An old man. Reagan's advisors told him, if you want to insult Gaddafi, call him a crazy dog. And that's exactly what Reagan did, called him a crazy dog. They were learning how to insult one another, and I think they were effective in that. But what exactly is it that we have to run from if somebody says, you're old? I'm old. I'm old. And you know what? It's much better than the alternative. Because if I weren't old, I'd be dead. So I hope I grow older. I hope I'm with you. You may not hope I'm with you, but I hope I'm with you for another 20 years. My point is, if somebody is fat, we're fat. Well, you can argue that you, as a matter of fact, she's passed now, but the wife of my favorite professor in university, Patricia Connor Schroyer, a very proud Irish woman. She had to beg Weight Watchers to get into Weight Watchers because she was just a little bit fat. And the people in Weight Watchers were really heavy, and they had to all agree that she could come in, because compared to the people that were there in Monterey Park, which was where she lived, they were all heavy and she wasn't, and so it looked like, well, what are you complaining about? You don't have very much. But she thought she was fat, and she wanted to be thinner. So again, it's absolute only in a relative context. Isn't that ironic? If you put anybody in this room with a group of sumo wrestlers, you are automatically the skinniest person there. So why do we fear names? If somebody says, well, you know what, you're not very educated. There's a man, he used to be a Roman Catholic priest. He had 3 PhDs. 3 PhDs. And when he went back to review some of the things that he had written in one of the dissertations, he couldn't figure out what it was he had said. His name is Malachi Martin, a very famous writer and apologist for all things Catholic. You can look this up. This is why we have Google, so I can't pull the wool over anybody's eyes. Malachi, M-A-L-A-C-H-I, Martin, M-A-R-T-I-N. 3 PhDs, a Jesuit. And he left the priesthood. He left the priesthood, not the Catholic Church, but the priesthood. So in the presence of Malachi Martin, who wants to claim that they're educated? It's hard enough to get 1 PhD, right, Manny? It's hard enough to get 1. Amir has 1. Suzanne Takao doesn't have a PhD, she has an EDD. That's a doctorate of education. That means she doesn't have language. PhD, you have to have language because you have to read in original languages. But EDD, you don't. Bill Cosby has an EDD, the comedian. But Malachi Martin, he reads in many languages. Now, I just picked this name out of the air, and it may not have any significance to you. But would you really want to say that you're smart? Then what word are you going to use to convey the difference between him and you? He's really smart. He's super smart. Okay. But you know what? If you're with a bunch of people that have Down syndrome, you become that person. You become that person. And I don't mean by saying Down syndrome to hurt anybody's feelings. I'm simply saying that there is a relative judgment and there is an absolute judgment. And until we can be honest with ourselves, we can't say how we are doing as a people in the most important thing, which are the religious matters. Ethan, I'm talking. Now, the most important thing that I read, I'm going to repeat to you, or that I prayed, actually I should have said that. The most important thing that I prayed from this gospel, I will repeat to you, because this is which you have, all of you, this is which all of you have in common. For wherever the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered together. Wherever the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered together. Do you know what that means? The carcass is the body of Christ. In order for the communion today to have meaning for you, you must confess in your heart that you are taking the body, the real body of Jesus Christ. The very body of Jesus Christ. If you are, and if you have confessed, and if you are worthy, then you are described as an eagle, which in the four incorporeal beasts describes St. John, the evangelist, the composer of the fourth gospel. And to be an eagle, the eagles go to the highest place. They do not allow another bird to perch in a spot that is higher. They will drive the bird out, and they have the power and the strength to do it. This is the strength that we gather from our Lord God and Savior Jesus Christ, if we are confessing properly. But I spoke to you about these other things first so that you can know yourself. Not to condemn yourself, but just to know yourself. Because there is no one except the Lord that is allowed to make the final pronouncement or judgment over you. Someone may call you fat. There was a time in my life, maybe you've heard this, that a human body displaces more water than it weighs. So therefore a human body floats. That's only true until you get your body fat down to 2% or less. And then you sink like a stone. You can take a complete, full inhalation, grab your legs, and you will simply sink like a rock slowly. Now, you've never experienced that. I have. This is one of the ways that they tell how they measure body fat in a tank of water. They know by how much water you displace, and they know about your weight as they weigh you in a chair or in other type of scale when you are submerged underwater. And you let out all your air to reduce the buoyancy. But you will, if you get down to 2% body fat, you will sink like a stone because you are dense. Try, when you go home, try pouring any oil that you have on water. Any oil at all. Butter, fat, oil, any kind of oil. It's always at the surface. It's always at the surface. Fat floats. Fat floats. The dense tissue doesn't, and it goes right to the bottom. All right. So there's a way that I can pronounce on myself, I'm fat. Now, am I fat relative to other priests in this diocese? Not so much. Am I fat as a proportion of my body weight compared to other priests in this diocese? Not so much. But am I fat? Yes, I am. Absolutely, I am. Does it hurt my feelings if someone comes up and say, you're fat? No, it doesn't hurt my feelings. Because it's an accurate assessment of my condition. Has anybody ever talked to you about your spiritual condition? Has anybody said to you, this is what your spirit is like? This is what your spirit seems like to me? Has anybody ever said that to you in your entire life? They've measured you in all kinds of ways. All through school you're given tests. And you're saying, well, you're with this group, or you're with this group, or you're with this group. And when you graduate, you graduate with honor, or you graduate with great honor, or you graduate with greatest honor, or praise. The Latin word is laude. Laude. But they don't talk about your spirit, do they? Nobody talks to you about your spirit. And it's because there's a fear that you have conveyed to every single person, don't talk to me about that. Don't talk to me about that. There's things that you are forbidden to talk to me about. You know what you can't hide from is when you go to the emergency room and they do a blood test. Or as I had an MRI and it came back that I have diverticulosis. All right? And that I have a couple of small hernias. I didn't know I had the small hernias, and I didn't know that I had diverticulosis. You don't need to know what that is, but I know I now have it. What am I going to do? Argue? Am I going to argue? Why is it that we are going to argue with what people say about us? It's because the suspicion is that the people aren't telling the truth, and that by not telling the truth, they want to gain an advantage over us. You have to trust people that are in place in your lives to guard you spiritually, so that you can listen to them and obey. Remember the end times. In the end times, when the end times come, you will have no longer the chance to get to an advocate. It will be over with by then. So now is the time. Now is the time when you have to make another, fuller, more complete connection with the person that confesses you, and listen honestly. And don't back away from the bad news. Because if you do that, you'll not be able to even have an opportunity to correct. I hope you've understood what I've said. It's hard for me to talk about some of these things because I know no matter what I say, it's like when I talk to Egyptians generally about death, everybody just falls over. Inside their head, I can just kind of like see, like that door is shut. Don't talk to me about that. Don't talk to me about that. It means that you want me to be dead. No, I don't want anybody to be dead. I myself don't want to be dead. I don't want you to be dead. But for some reason, the country that is more famous for death than anything else, the whole people are afraid to talk about death. And you look at all the tombs of the pharaohs, and why everybody goes to Egypt to see the tombs, the places where dead people are. But don't talk about death. Well, we have to be able to talk about these things. And you have to trust. You have to trust. I'm going to do my best to die in front of all of you. I'm going to do my best to stroll out the time. Right? so that I don't just like drop dead. So like slowly, you know, so that you can see that everything I have ever done or tried to do for you, in those last days I will do myself. Not to gain praise, but to show you that there's nothing actually to fear. Because I'm going to try as best I can to be with the one I love. I'm going to try to be with the one who loves me. I'm going to try to be with the Lord Jesus Christ. And I wish this for all of you, and I pray that it will happen. Glory be to His holy name, both now and ever, and unto the age of all ages. Amen.